Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today is day 90 in the ongoing war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. So again, I say that, day 90. Where's General Milley at? I want to have a conversation with him about some of the information he was getting prior to this conflict. And again, just to kind of toot the channel's horn, we did anticipate that it would not be a 72-hour, 80-hour conflict, much as was discussed in some of the mainstream media and obviously some of the talking military heads of the ongoing conflict. And it's kind of interesting in the comment section that some of the Ukrainian supporters would identify the channel as being a Russian supportive channel when at the initial stages of the conflict, or going into the conflict. I had talked about that this would be a very, very difficult operation for the Russian forces, and we could face a very long, protracted conflict, and then obviously on the Russian end, I got some pushback around that, and how it would not be a very, very long conflict. So it's as they say, you sometimes you just can't win either way, but. Today we're going to have a look at what is really causing the Russian inability to prosecute some of its offensive operations near Izum. And you have to really look at the Ukrainian force disposition in that area and look at some of the units that the Ukrainian military has deployed in the area near Izum, because that area, we did see a successful river crossing take place, and then the Russians having the ability to continue to drive south. So this is why we have seen some of the better Ukrainian units be pushed into this area of operation to try and prevent this massive breakout of Russian forces. And in all likelihood, if the Ukrainians had not repositioned certain forces and moved the forces that they did move into this area, the situation for the Ukrainians would have become very, very precarious, and it allowed the Ukrainian military to reinforce and prepare even more extensive defensive operations, especially near Sloviansk and the crucial city of Kramatorsk. If Kramatorsk falls, this equation gets very, very difficult east of the Dnieper River for the Ukrainian armed forces. But to prevent the massive breakout, specifically of some of the units that the Russians had thrown into this were very large, heavy mechanized units, such as the 90th Tank Division and a host of other units as well, to include the 1st Guards Tank Army, and obviously we know the 2nd Motorized Rifle Division and the 4th Tank Division were deployed in that force construct as well. So if we look at first what the Ukrainians have deployed along this route of advance against Russian forces trying to penetrate both west and south of Izum, first we have to look at some of the most elite formations, or the best trained Ukrainian formations that have been deployed against Russian forces in this area. So first off, you've got the 25th Airborne Brigade, and these are separate from the Ukrainian ground forces, much like the Russians do with their airborne forces. The Ukrainians have gone the same sort of route, where you kind of have this separate force all to its own, which are the Special Operations Forces. And then you also have their air mobile formations, or rapid deployment formations. And these formations do also contain, obviously, mechanized elements and tank elements, much like their Russian counterparts as well in terms of their airborne forces. So you have that unit. You also have the 81st Air Mobile Brigade. and that's actually a motorized brigade. And then down here you have the 95th Air Assault Brigade, and then you have the 79th Air Assault Brigade. So some of the best units in the Ukrainian army. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 Ukrainian air mobile rapid deployment brigades. These are highly trained, very, very good fighting units that have been deployed against or trying to prevent this ongoing offensive taking place south of Izum. Furthermore, reinforcing those 4 air mobile brigades, you have the 3rd Tank Brigade, and then you also have operating within the vicinity that could deploy battalion groupings to directly support these air mobile units is the 4th Tank Brigade. Now, you also have other units as well. You have 2nd Battalion Ukrainian Volunteer Corps, 3rd Company Ukrainian Volunteer Corps, 4th Company Ukrainian Volunteer, and these units are actually more like battalion-sized elements. And then you have their Special Operations Forces. You have 8th Regiment of Special Purpose Forces directly supporting the ongoing defensive operations near Izum. And you also have a host of territorial brigades and units and volunteer type units that are not present on this map. And obviously, we also suspect there are significant other Ukrainian forces that have been brought from other areas of the country to try and prevent this breakout south of Izum. So that is one reason why you're kind of seeing this now, the slow going of Russian forces. They have made some advances in some areas near Izum, but again, the Ukrainian forces have the Ukrainian military has basically put all capabilities in trying to stop this offensive, because what the Ukrainians fear is this kind of this wide arc going all the way down to Horlovika, or possibly kind of circumventing and meeting up with some of these southern Donbass forces coming out of Donetsk. And that was obviously a big concern. Now, what happened was, because there was so much focus on that Izum offensive, the Russians were able to focus some of its better units, such as some of these naval infantry brigades, in the offensive operations taking place near Popashna. And those operations continue as we speak. And then obviously the Ukrainians are kind of using this not one step back mentality or strategy, and they refuse to really give any ground in any idea that there may be or could be some sort of a tactical withdrawal and fight in areas that is more advantageous for defensive operations, such as in Severodonetsk, is kind of strange. And that is maybe one reason why we have seen the Ukrainian high command sack some of its territorial defense leadership personnel and some generals, as we suspect that there were some generals that wanted to fall back to areas that could be more easily defended. And one of those areas, again, is Severodonetsk. Obviously, if the Ukrainians were to fall back and place new lines within the vicinity of Lysychansk and prevent the river crossing across the Donetsk River, which is here, seems to make more common sense. However, the Ukrainians have continued this not one step back strategy, where they are keeping forces, and we know now that there are fairly significant amounts of forces, quite possibly numbering now in the thousands, that were maintained in Severodonetsk. There were some initial reports that the Ukrainians were withdrawing and leaving a few hundred forces in Severodonetsk, but we think that force construct is now a little bit higher than what was originally reported. And unfortunately for the Ukrainians, they're probably going to lose a lot of those soldiers in this continued operational method, where they're not taking any steps back and fighting for every piece of territory. Now, with that being said, it has to to absolutely sap a bit of the morale of Russian forces when they realize that the Ukrainians are not going to give up any amounts of land whatsoever. We kind of saw that in Mariupol and in some other areas. The only area initially in the conflict we didn't see it was in Melitopol, down here in the kind of the southeast. And then strangely enough, and we didn't anticipate this, was the rapid fall of Kherson. So if you look at Kherson and you look at, you have this, obviously the very large Dnieper River that flows into the Black Sea, and then a very large town on the kind of the northwestern part of the map here. So it is absolutely a very defendable town, but for whatever reason, the Russians were able to make very, very rapid advance, seize control of these bridges without them being blown, and we suspect that quite possibly there could have been some sort of internal dissent inside the Ukrainian armed forces, which may have allowed the Russians to gain control of Kherson before the Ukrainian high command was able to figure out what was actually occurring in this area of operations. But with that being said, also some of the best Russian units, some of these airborne units and Spetsnaz units were involved in this operation in the direction of Kherson as well. But the lines have relatively been now stable in the area of Kherson for both sides. The Ukrainians have formed up and solidified their lines with a host of military units, kind of protecting a route of advance towards Mykolaiv up here in the north. We know, obviously, earlier the Russians did get to the outskirts of the city and had actually occupied the airport right here in this locale, but were later pushed back and back to these lines, which are now near Kherson. And in fact, we had talked, or it was widely publicized that the Russians may make an advance on Odessa, and this channel reported that didn't think that was going to happen. Obviously, there are a host of Ukrainian units, and obviously the Russians would have to seize control of Mykolaiv, which would be very, very tough for the Russians to do at this point. We think the Russians are going to be more focused, again, I talked about this in the last two previous videos, in the direction of Zaporizhia for a number of reasons. But we anticipate that could happen in the coming days and weeks ahead. But right now, the Russians very, very focused on driving Ukrainian forces out of Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, and completing this encirclement, whether it's going to be the near encirclement, which would be kind of east of Kramatorsk and east of Sloviansk, running just to the east of the E40 highway, and this is kind of where the new Ukrainian line would establish itself if, in fact, these forces are surrounded, and the Ukrainians should be able to get some of these forces out of this pocket. Especially how the current conflict is evolving, it's relatively slow, unless we see some major maneuvering by Russian forces and a much more aggressive Russian strategy start to take form. But we're not really seeing that right now. We're seeing, again, this methodical process by Russian forces, again, using a lot of heavy artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, tactical aircraft, to degrade, reduce, and destroy Ukrainian forces in this area of operations. We do know further to the northwest that the Ukrainian counteroffensive has stalled, and there has been some new Russian pushes in this area as well, thus pushing back some of the Ukrainian forces that were operating kind of to the north of Kharkov. But that is the status right now. We continue to watch what's happening in the Donbass area of operation. Also, we're hearing that some reports would indicate that Poland may introduce forces into western Ukraine, and the rationale behind that would be for Polish forces to take up positions along the Belarusian border with the intent to allow further Ukrainian forces here in the West to be allocated for defensive and quite possibly offensive operations within the vicinity of the eastern Donbass. And right now, you have a number of units. You have the 61st Yager Brigade. It's a light infantry unit, actually a very good unit that was pivotal in some of the early defensive operations against Russian forces to the northwest of Kiev. And you also have a number of territorial units. The 104th Defense Brigade, Territorial Defense Brigade. You have the 100th Defense Brigade, and then further to the west as well, you have additional territorial defense units and what have you, and special police units that are allocated to these areas, and a number of mechanized brigades that are more of a tactical reserve, such as the 15th Mechanized Brigade. Now, it's possible this brigade has been pushed elsewhere, either to the north or even moved to the east towards the Donbass. But the whole concept behind the possibility of deploying those Polish troops would be, again, to allow Ukrainian forces to further move these forces to the east and have those forces deployed against the Russian army. Now, will that happen? I mean, that's going to be a fairly serious escalation on the part of the Poles, which, again, could cause direct conflict between NATO forces and Russian forces if, in fact, the Poles introduce forces into western Ukraine. I would say at that point they would become valid targets of the Russian military at that point, and there's probably quite a bit of NATO pressure not wanting to have those Polish forces deploy in western Ukraine at this point. At the same time, maybe it is a strategy. Maybe NATO wants to see the possibility of some sort of conflict that could erupt, where it could further introduce further forces against Russian forces. But then again, if that happens, as I've talked about before, in all probability, we would then look at World War III. But that is the current status on the ground. We'll obviously continue to monitor the situation and report as the situation changes, and we continue to watch very, very closely what's happening in the eastern Donbass. Again, thanks for joining us. More to come very, very soon. Have a great day.